So Derek sent me his G4X CIVIC file, and I'm just going to have a look at it for him. The first thing I notice is he's got a couple of errors, and if you go down here to status, error fault code count 3. So I'm just going to have a look at that. Sometimes it's just you know, the temperature range for the sensors or whatever, but I'll have a look at that. Also, we don't have all the headings up here that I want. So what I go to is I go layout, load layout, which is down here, and then we'll go default 1366 by 768 and open that up. And then that gives us all these extra headings up the top. So, whoops. So we've got the fuel map, ignition map, idle, cold start, etc., etc. So that's the first thing that we need to do is go layout, load layout, and then select either default or default 13. I always use this one, 1366 by 768, because most laptops that fits the screen best. But anyway, I'll have a look and I'll add to this. Then Derek can see if he can get his car going, because he has a couple of issues. Alrighty, next thing I did, apart from changing to this layout, was I had a look in the ignition tune file, and one of the biggest things that can make things confusing is the columns or values in your table. So just let me close this and I'll open up the original file that Derek had. So see here, I've got, this is Derek's original one, so I can always refer back to that. And then I've got this one that I've made changes to, but then I'll probably, when I make more changes, I'll probably save another one. And I usually keep multiple iterations so that if I make a mistake, then I've got something to revert back to. I haven't just overwritten the same one. So let's just bring this one over here. And so again, it's doesn't have the correct layout. So I'm going to go layout, load layout, default 1366 768, open. Okay, now I've got all my correct headings, and then I'm going to go to the ignition map, and we've got here -100, -80, -60, -40, -20, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then this was the biggest thing that I found we didn't need. So you've got 750 RPM, 1000, 1250, 1500, 1750. You just don't need that to start out anyway. You don't need that much resolution. So what I'm going to do is right click on the table, go axis setup, and I'm going to go initialize axis. Boom, it's given me 0, and then in 500 increments, 500 RPM increments up to 7,000. Now I'll just close that and just double check. Okay, so no, this is tuned up to 1,000, is tuned up to 9,000. So let me just init the axis, go to the end, and we'll go 8,000. And then we'll go 9,000. And then we'll also initialize this other axis. So, and that's smooth that out. And then it'll ask, does it want to interpolate all the values? We just say yes. So now it goes 0 RPM, 500, 1000. And look, if you need to put a 750 RPM point in there to make the idle work better, then yep, go ahead. But so I've just made sure that is correct. And the reason why I've done that is so it makes it easier to compare to something like this. What have we got? The base map. So this is a Honda Civic 96 to 99 G4 Extreme base map. And I've done the same thing. So we're working with the same kind of values. The only thing I didn't do with this one was I didn't add the 8,000 and 9,000. So I'll just go along here and see what this does, because I should have done this at the start. 8,000, and then we'll go across 9,000, and then we'll go okay, and yes, fill in the rows, etc. So we'll just double check that at 0, map. That was manifold gauge pressure before. Let me change. Oh, no, it wasn't. So here's the thing, right? So this table is referencing map. This table is referencing manifold gauge pressure. If you're turbo, you generally want manifold gauge pressure. Map, I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to MGP. Boom. Okay. Just initialize the axis. Yep, that's all good. So then we'll go okay. All right, now we're comparing apples with apples. So minus 100 at 9,000 RPM is 32. And on this one, it's 41.6. And what I need to do is I need to compare this back to the original file, no, that is the original file. So yeah, anyway, so with your tables, if you're comparing one map to another, you need to make sure that your axes are the same. So you're comparing MGP, gauge pressure, with gauge pressure, or if this was map, you want this to be map. And then same with all these values up here. You want them to be the same, so you're comparing apples with apples. Now, just quickly, so this is the ignition table. I imagine this is tuned. This is a tuned ignition table. This is Derek's base map. I'm going to ask him where he got it from. But this is an untuned base map. So this is stock from LINK, and for a standard engine you should be able to plug this in and the engine should run. So if I press H and we'll go to this one and press H, it gives us a general idea of how it looks. So, you know, green over in this area, red over in this area. And then if we have a look here, green over in this area, red over in this area, but for some reason throughout here it's got a bit of a green area. So I mean, I would probably say that this one looks a lot better, but just for starting out, those are a couple of things to get us going. Next I'm going to look at this fuel table, and I have to do the same thing again. So what are we looking at? Minus 100 up to 140. And then on this base table, we're minus 100 up to 140. So that's good. And then 0 to 7,500 RPM increments. And this one, we're 0 to 9,000 in 500 RPM increments. So what we're going to do is we're going to go axis setup. We're going to put an 8,000 on here, on the end. And we're going to put a 9,000 on here. And it's going to, when I go okay, it's going to ask if it wants to fill in the values. And yes, we do. So this is what it's done. Minus 100, 12.8. You're not really going to be down there. This is, vacuum is about minus 40, minus 60. So if we were talking idle, actually, right? So it's vacuum. and we're in this sort of, let's say 500 to 1500 area. So there, that kind of area there is where it should hover around for idle. So let's have a look over here. What did we say? -80 to -20. Just gonna scroll back up. -80 to -20. Okay, so here, our table's different. This is 0, 500, blah, blah, blah. This one here has no 0 and it's starting at 750. So let's go axis setup, initialize axis. So now it's starting at 0, going to 500, and ending at 7,000, but we want an 8,000. Whoops, not 800. Get rid of that. Okay, we want 8,000 and we want 9,000. Okay. Okay. Initialize, yes. All right, so now we're comparing apples with apples. So 0 to 9,000, 0 to 9,000. And so we want 500 RPM to 1500 RPM -20. So that is our idle area. So this one, smack bang in the middle is 22.8. This one smack bang in the middle is 20.8. Now, these are both traditional. So this is how many milliseconds the injector is firing. So this is the pulse width of the injector. So this one is actually richer because it's 22.8 versus in the middle of this one is 20.8. So this one is 2 milliseconds faster. But having a look at the base map, their master fuel is 22 milliseconds versus this one is only 6 milliseconds. Now, what that might be is, this one is for the standard size injectors, which might be, let's call them 400 cc. If this one has 1000 cc injectors, you wouldn't need that 22 milliseconds. For a bigger injector, you would need a smaller master fuel. So if you go into the help file, it actually tells you how to run a first startup. So go in here. In fact, I'm going to go to the search and I'm just going to go first start. Okay, enter. Gear shift, starter control, blah, 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 blah. User can setup, fuel. Device, that's can information. Let me try first start up. First time startup, there we go. First time startup, okay, and it tells you what to check. So it says, before attempting to configure the ECU, look, you guys can read all this, but you need to do the TPS. You need to configure your map sensor. You need to make sure your engine coolant temperature sensor is reading the right amount. You need to make sure your intake air temperature sensor is correct. You need to make sure all your inputs are correct. So if I go down the side here, just trying to prop my arm up. Okay, analog inputs. Ambient temp. This must be a new link thing. A new thing. Oh, and I've lost my fuel main. But here's all your stuff. Accelerometer. Okay, that's... Okay, oil pressure, oil temp, blah, blah, blah. Auxiliary outputs, digital inputs. Oil pressure switch, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you need to go through this and make sure all that's correct first. You've got to start from the beginning. As long as that's correct, then you can move on to the next thing. But it tells you here, if using traditional fuel equation, locate the master fuel setting. I actually just got rid of it on this base map. Fuel main. I'd accidentally got rid of it from here by opening that other thing. So I went ECU settings, typed in fuel main up the top there. That gave me this table. I'm going to take my fuel main table and put it back up here. Lock it in. Whoops. Adjust the width. And then I'm going to lock it in place. Okay, and so it tells you in this help file, crank the engine, traditional fuel equation, blah, 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 master fuel setting. Okay, master fuel is this guy here. It tells you what to do. Crank the engine, make sure it starts, adjust the master fuel, blah, blah, blah. I'll let you read that, and yeah, these are the first steps. Okay, so what I've done now is, because I've changed these axes, I'm saving a copy of the file on my desktop. That's the original file. That's another one I made changes to. This is a third one. So Derek's, blah, 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 Jono's changes, and then I say what changes I made. So fuel table axis and ignition table axis. So now the fuel table goes from 0. I can't move it because I'm trying to save it. Here, let me save it. Save. Okay, so now the fuel table goes from 0 to 9,000, and manifold gauge pressure, it goes from -100 up to 140. Now what I can do is I can actually go compare, and I can select the original base map. Here's the problem. The original base map of these yellow values, and see how they don't line up? So in the original file, it's giving me 16.8, but that's for 750 RPM, which on the original file is here. Oops, is here. See the original file, 500, 1000. So this is where you can't compare these values properly. Okay. I'm just checking that the gauge pressure goes up to the same amount. But what we would need to do is go into the original tune file, fix this up, and then we can compare the two. Okay, so I believe that's what I did with the other one. So if I go open this one here, no, I don't want to save it. Always make sure, okay, we're having problems with the computer. What the fuck's going on? Doesn't like it. All right, I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on here. All right, so what I've done is I've initialized this axis and then added the 8,000 and 9,000 on the end on Derek's original file. I've done that for both the fuel table. So initialize RPM axis, add the 8,000, add the 9,000, and then I also initialized the MGP axis. Saved it and allowed it to interpolate. I then went to ignition tune. I went axis, initialize axis, added the 8,000 and the 9,000. Then I went to MGP, init access, okay, interpolate yes. Okay. Then what I did was I went over to this base map that is the G4X CIVIC base map, and I did the same thing. So I initialized the RPM axis and added the 8,000 and the 9,000. I then initialized this should be NGP. So yeah, because ignition table is in an MGP. So I'm going to change this to MGP. MGP, boom, okay. Axis init, okay. Double checking, got 8,000, 9,000, yes, okay, boom. There we go. So now, this fuel table on the base map, I can compare to this fuel table on Derek's tune, because we're comparing apples with apples. Same with the ignition map, apples to apples, okay? Hope that makes sense. So now on my desktop, which is where I saved it, I've got Derek's original file, which I'm not gonna mess with, because now I've got that as a backup. I've got this one that I've made changes to, and then I've got this one that is the factory base map that I've changed the fuel table and ignition table axes to match this table. Then if I make changes to this, I'll save another copy here. If I make changes again, I'll save another copy here. That way I've got different iterations of this original file. I've still got the original file, and I've also got, if I make a mistake when I make my changes, I'm not overwriting everything. So yeah, that's one thing that I do to start out with. So I've now got, where's my mouse? I've got this one loaded up over here, and I can start to take a look at it and work out what Derek is having trouble with and how we can sort of solve what his problems that he's having. I haven't even delved into that far. I've just done the basic, get myself sorted out so I know what I'm looking at, because we didn't even have a 0 RPM figure before. It was 7, you know, anyway, you saw it, but yeah. I'll talk to Derek and I'll see what we need to look at. So another thing we've got is we've got this ECU fault code 49, analog temp above error, high output. So I've gone into the oil temperature thing, analog temperature high. So this was set to 4 volts. What that means is that if the sensor sees over 4 volts, it's going to tell you that you have an error. So let me just see if I can compare to one of my tune files. I don't know where mine are on this computer. I don't think that they're... Oh, LINK ECU files. Don't think that that's where they are though. Let me just look in downloads. Oh yeah, here we go. Cresta E85 logs and maps. No. Tune files for other cars. Don't want to organize. Here, I'll just use my... Oh, none of the stuff copied across. Okay, amazing. Yeah, okay. Let's go all files. All right, there we go. That's better. I know why, because it's G4 Plus software. Yeah, mine's G4 Plus. Okay, so what I'm going to do... File, open. I had to open G4 Plus software. Here we go. Okay, I don't want base maps. Go to downloads. Okay, here's my latest. This is my latest tune file. So if I go over here, analog inputs, oil pressure. Okay, here's my oil pressure gauge. Right, so AN volt 3 high error is 5 volts. So, Derek's was set at 4 volts. let's set it to 5 volts, okay? Or you can make it 4.95, but let's do 5 volts. So there we go. I mean, his is error value 105C. Mine's at 105 kPa. Oh, that's pressure. Okay, sorry. All right, I don't want the pressure. I want temperature, oil temp, engine oil temp. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I thought so. 4.95, and I've got mine at 100C. So let's change this. 4.95. Boom. There we go. And make it 100 degrees C. Boom. He's got the same sensor, Bosch NTC. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go save as. And I've got table axis, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to go and oil temp fixed. Okay. And I'm going to make sure it's saving to the right spot, which it isn't. So I'm going to go desktop and then save it to my desktop. Boom. Going to close this down. There it is there. So now we've got the original file with the axis and ignition table sorted out. And then this is axis ignition table sorted out and the oil temp doodad fixed. Okay, so I'm actually going to exit this file. Do I want to make save changes? I've already saved them, so no. I'm going to reopen it. Drag it back over here. And it's still telling me I've got an error. So what I'm going to do is go ECU controls, clear the fault codes. Boom. All right, so now I've got no more errors. And because I've set this up properly, that error shouldn't pop up again. He did have other errors, but I can revert back to this original file to look at what those errors were and fix them up as well. So I'll do that in a sec. Alrighty, so you know how I said about in the help file? Contents, first startup, first time startup, and we go through this stuff. Got to do this. TPS, map, coolant temp sensor, IAT. I just thought I'd check what the IAT sensor's doing. It's not set up. So you've got, okay, so TPS is set to AN volt 1, map sensor oil pressure, engine coolant temp, engine oil temp. It doesn't have an air intake temperature sensor. For speed density, you need to have a map sensor and you need to have an IAT sensor. So I'm going to talk to Derek and see if he's got an IAT sensor. If he doesn't, he needs to put one in.